How to Make It, der Podcast für Musiker, die wirklich etwas erreichen wollen. Präsentiert von Adamant Music. Herzlich willkommen zur 16. Episode von How to Make It. In dieser Folge spreche ich mit dem SubmitHub-Gründer Jason Grishkoff über seine Erfolgsgeschichte, die Entstehung von SubmitHub, die Relevanz von Musikblogs, Radios und Soundcloud und vieles mehr. Also viel Spaß mit der Episode. It's an absolute pleasure for me to introduce my guest for today. He's the founder, coder, and mastermind behind the platform SubmitHub, where he connects artists to bloggers, curators, influencers, and many more. A very important tool for musicians, labels, promoters, and also the music outlets that I personally use on a daily basis. It's an honor to have you, and thank you so much for your time, Jason Grishkoff.
Wow. Yannick, did you make that all up on the fly? Because that was beautifully put.
Maybe let's start with a little with your backstory of like yourself and SubmitHub. You originally started out as a blogger yourself and then founded SubmitHub in, I think, 2015. How did that all come about and why did you actually start the platform in the first place? And maybe you can also quickly describe what SubmitHub exactly is for those who don't know.
Okay, well, I think starting with the history will lead us nicely into why SubmitHub exists and what it accomplishes. And I'll try to do it as quickly and succinctly as I can.
No worries.
I started my music blog, which is called Indie Shuffle, back in 2009, roughly. And this was when music torrenting was at its peak. So I found myself on a few of these private BitTorrent sites where there was an incredible amount of amazing music to sift through, whether it was classic or new. And one site in particular was called what.cd, or formerly I think it was called oink.me.uk, something like that. It was a private music torrent site, but it had 20,000 members. So it was private, but not really private. You had to get an invite to join, but once you were in, the music you were exposed to was phenomenal. And they had some really good charts for songs that have been released in the last 24 hours. Or actually, I suppose back then in 2009, it wasn't so much about singles, but more about EPs and albums. But either way, they would have a chart that showed you albums that have been released within the last 24 hours. And I started discovering an incredible array of music from a lot of artists that are quite popular today, like Foals, Two Door Cinema Club, Friendly Fires. I was quite into indie rock at the time. And all of this music had to be shared somewhere. And I suppose I was both lucky and unlucky in that when I graduated college, I got a job on the other side of the country. I was living in California and I got a job in Washington, D.C. And so I flew out there to work a consulting job that I ended up hating. And I was so far away from my friends that my way of connecting with them was by starting up an email list that said, hey, here are the 3 albums I found this week that I feel like you really should listen to. And a few of my friends wrote back and they said, this is awesome. I wish I could just listen to it in one place. And I said, oh, okay, well, let me try whip up a quick website with the embeds. And so next thing you know, I started to send out my emails with links to my website instead. And I would write little snippets about it. And that's basically when I started my music blog, Indie Shuffle, 2009-ish. That also happened to be when music blogs were taking off, so to speak. The attention we were getting was monumental. And I remember within the first couple months of running Indie Shuffle, I had 100,000 visits. And that was crazy.
Oh, wow.
And it was addictive. So I got totally hooked on growing this number. And I joined a couple of blogger communities. There was one on a forum called Elbows, which was great. That introduced me to Hype Machine, joined Hype Machine, which for those people who don't know, is probably one of the most influential music websites in the history of online music. Alas, they have fallen to the wayside, but they had a good 5 or 6 year run as kind of the it. If you hit #1 on Hype Machine, you were going to be headlining Coachella and Bonnaroo and Primavera Sound. And the way Hype Machine worked was that they just tracked 1,000 music blogs and said, hey, this is what everyone's writing about. So if you were one of those blogs who was picked up by Hype Machine, it meant that you started to get a ton of traffic and recognition and authority within the music industry. So people quickly realized that if they managed to get their song written about on 10, 15, or 20 Hype Machine listed blogs, it was really going to light the fire under their music butts, so to speak. And Hype Machine was a blessing and a curse. So for us, it was at one point sending us 3,000 or 4,000 visitors per day. It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, because everyone was realizing that the ticket to success was to do well on Hype Machine, it meant that our inbox at Indie Shuffle was becoming less sacred by the day. So the big thing back in 2012, 2013, 2014 was to go out and buy a spreadsheet of email addresses.
Mm-hmm.
If you were an artist, you could go pay someone $20 and they would send you a spreadsheet that had 1,000 email addresses. And then you would just select all and send them your email. And the net effect for us bloggers was that what started out as a really cool experience, you get an email from an artist that you love, and or maybe one you've never heard of, and you blog about it. It suddenly became a nightmare. I was getting upwards of 300 emails per day from musicians, publicists, labels. It was completely unmanageable. And my experience wasn't unique either. The same thing was happening to other bloggers. And what happened was that most of us just started to ignore those emails. And we would either look for music different ways, or many bloggers actually just stopped blogging. They found that it wasn't fun anymore. Virtually no one was actually making a living from their music blog. I was one of the lucky few who actually was able to do that. But I think that's because I had a more tech-focused and entrepreneurial approach to it, whereas the majority of music bloggers just did it because they love music. They never thought about how to optimize their advertising or drive traffic or just code and tweak and UX and design. And I was absolutely addicted to all of that. Plus, I loved finding new music. So my inbox wasn't sacred, and revenue was actually starting to dry up. The online advertising industry was transitioning into something different. And I decided that I had to kind of solve two problems with one keyboard, kill two birds with one stone. And that's where the idea for SubmitHub came about. It was to solve the issue that I had where I was receiving 300 plus emails a day and ignoring them, which meant I was missing a lot of music. And B, it was so that I could take all of my eggs out of one basket and distribute them across a few baskets. So up until that time, Indie Shuffle was kind of it. But as Indie Shuffle's revenue was drying up, it was becoming more apparent that I might have to go back to working a corporate day job, which I didn't want to do. So late 2015, I got around to coding SubmitHub. And the idea behind it is very simple. An artist pastes a link to listen to their song, be it on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, Bandcamp, Apple Music, whatever. They give us their artist name, the song title, a few other little bits of information, and then they choose who they want to send it to. So SubmitHub lets them filter all of these blogs that they were normally buying in a spreadsheet. You can almost think of it the same way. SubmitHub is a really advanced blog directory. And what's different is that we give you tons of stats, and the blogs actually want to receive your songs, and they're actually going to listen. And so what will happen is you land on SubmitHub, you upload your song, you get to a list where you can filter by genre, you choose who you want to send to, you can make informed decisions about who you're going to send to, and you send off your song and you wait. Within 48 hours, you're going to get a response. Hopefully it's a positive one, but the reality is that 9 out of 10 times, it tends to be a thanks but no thanks type of response. So in a nutshell, SubmitHub is a directory of music bloggers, Spotify playlisters, and just music curators of all kinds for musicians to send their music to. And it allows a very transparent and open communication process that just runs smoothly.
Do you know how many outlets like radio stations, playlist curators, influencers, etc. you have on SubmitHub?
1,500.
Oh, wow. Okay. And from all around the globe?
Yeah. At this point, very well distributed. I would say some of our weaker countries are China and India. But in terms of Western music, I think we've got a footprint in almost every country.
That's amazing. You talked about music blogs and that they maybe lost readership How do you personally value the influence of music blogs these days? They don't have as many readers as a few years ago, but still it's very targeted, and I think many professionals still rely on them. What's your take on that?
I think an important way to approach that is to step back and ask what an artist should be looking for in 2020. So I think for an artist to go into the promotion cycle with the mentality that they're hoping to break out and be the next big thing is the wrong way to approach it. A better way to approach it is to try and seek out true fans, people who will buy your album, buy your t-shirt, stream you on Spotify, and tell their friends about you. And blogs are actually a really good way to go about that. So one of the things that's great about blogs is that it's real people on the other end writing and sharing their thoughts about your song. And while their audience over time has dwindled because many consumers have moved to, well, let's face it, superior products, Spotify, Apple, whatever. Not to mention, I mean, if you're paying a subscription, $10 a month to Spotify, you're going to use it. Otherwise, you feel like you're wasting it. And so people stop going to music blogs. They're not as technologically advanced as those other platforms, and they definitely don't give the same scope of music. The people still on music blogs, however, are there because they want to find new music. And many of those people are actually industry professionals themselves. So they can range from other bloggers to record labels to someone at Netflix who's looking for a soundtrack to their next song. So blog posts are really good to expose yourself to industry professionals. They also help you with your SEO. So SEO is your search engine optimization. But what happens today for many artists is that when someone searches for them on Google, the top things that are going to pop up are a SoundCloud link, a Spotify link, things that don't really have character or tell a story or give any evidence that other people are enjoying this music. And what's really cool with blog posts is that they start to build up your profile on Google. So when people look for you, they actually see people writing articles about you and sharing thoughts and engaging with your music. And that's cool. And that brings us to the third, probably not final, but the third one in my head is that blogs are great social proof. So if you are an artist, everyone's telling you you have to be on social media and build up your fan base there, but then what do you share with them? You share your music, maybe you share yourself making music, maybe you give insights into your life. But something that does really well in terms of sharing is when you are written about. You can put that up on your social media and say, hey, here's a really cool article from Indie Shuffle. They've written about me, so stoked about this. And Indie Shuffle's happy too because you're sending your fans to their website. So music blogs are great for that, whereas something like Spotify might give you a boost in your monthly listeners, but as soon as you pulled out of that playlist, you A, have no way to prove that you were ever actually in it, and B, those listeners are probably going to disappear because Spotify is a really passive listening experience, and the people on Spotify aren't necessarily there because they want to find new music. They're there because they want someone to tell them. Actually, they just want someone to take care of it for them, right? It's passive.
Yeah.
I log on to Spotify, open up a playlist I like, I hit shuffle play, and I never pay attention to where the music is coming from and who it is. And so chances are that if you have 10,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, you are going to struggle to pull an audience in your hometown. So for me, I think blogs still provide a huge benefit for artists. And we do actually see that on SubmitHub, most of the bloggers are receiving an average of about 24 submissions per day. And that's across all of them. Whereas Spotify playlisters are receiving about 16. So it seems like
oh, wow, okay.
There are more Spotify playlisters. I think we've got about 400 Spotify playlists and 300 music blogs. But people tend to send the music blogs more songs than they send to the Spotify curators. And I think that's because there's more tangible value that comes out of it. I mean, 1,000 listeners on Spotify is going to bring you $2. A blog post is going to maybe bring you $0. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to be more stoked about being able to show off that blog post than you will about saying you were included in a playlist.
And maybe you want a new fan that buys a t-shirt for $15.
Absolutely. You never know where it's going to lead. The people reading that blog might be a VP at Universal Music who just happens to really love that blog's selection. And sometimes the more niche, the smaller the blog, the more powerful it can be within that genre.
Just a little anecdote from me. We submitted also through SubmitHub to a few blogs, like I think it's about a year ago, and we got shared by one blog in Sweden and charted there. So
you never know where.
We didn't do anything else in Sweden. It was just that blog, and we managed to get into the iTunes charts.
Right, and it might not have even been that blog directly, but it just happened to have the spillover where one of the iTunes editors was reading that blog.
Right. Yeah.
And then they put it into the iTunes playlists, and then boom. And so it's a bit of I don't know if you've heard the phrase of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Mm-hmm. But when you're promoting music, it is a bit like that. You just have to put it all out there because you never know where that breakthrough is going to come through. And 99% of the time, it's going to lead nowhere, but you're really just gunning for that 1%.
Yeah. As we're already talking about influence and other platforms and outlets, you also have the option to submit to SoundCloud and radio stations on SubmitHub. Do you think that those are worth submitting to, that those are options that are worth it, or at least in order to translate to streaming services? Or is it a nice to have, but still not really relevant these days?
Not relevant these days.
Okay.
I mean, I'll just come straight out there. And I think what you'll see is that the influence score, which is this metric that we have on SubmitHub that we've spent a lot of time on, it tends to reflect my perception that SoundCloud reposting has, I don't think it was ever worthwhile. And radio is even more of a crapshoot because it can be huge, but the reality is that most of those huge FM radio stations who have the influence are not going to be easy to contact, nor do they want to be contacted. Many of them are just cycling through the same top hits over and over. And so I don't think it's worth it. The other difficulty with radio is that it's really hard to try and track or understand any sort of source of success. So you give the example a year ago where you were picked up by a Nordic blog, and next thing you know, you're charting in Scandinavia. And so it's not 100% guaranteed that blog was the reason, but you can sort of trace it back and go, okay, that was probably it.
Yep.
And with radio, oh man, it's an older format. And especially in many of the developed nations, it's an increasingly less popular means of consumption. So I don't think either of those are worth it.
Okay. Before we really get to SubmitHub, do you think that submitting to playlists or blogs outside of platforms such as SubmitHub is worth it? Or are, like, for example, submitting via email, or are pretty much all outlets on those platforms to streamline their submissions?
I think it's definitely worth it. Not everyone's on SubmitHub. Many of the larger blogs are definitely not on SubmitHub because they are more established in their ways. Pitchfork, for example, isn't going to bother with someone like us. The other thing, it comes back to that phrase I used earlier of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. You've got nothing to lose by sending an email to Indie Shuffle and trying to submit on Indie Shuffle. I can tell you personally that we're not going to bother with your email, but there are lots of other bloggers out there who are going to be a little more open to that. And furthermore, there's a whole body of curators who think SubmitHub's the worst thing that's ever been created and would never join it for their lives. So it's definitely worth it if you have the time. I think that's a big difference here, is that some artists, gosh, I might even say some artists don't have time to go out there and do all the promotion, right? So they either get a label or a publicist to help them with it. Many artists can do the self-promo themselves. And I think the reality is that if you want to be a successful musician in 2020, it helps to be able to do it yourself. But for many people, it's just not worth the time to go out there and email. They'd rather just use SubmitHub, know that they can spend 20 minutes on there, sink their money in, get guaranteed responses real quick, and move along. It's way cheaper than hiring a publicist. But yeah, you got nothing to lose by reaching out in other ways, sending tweets, Instagram messages, etc. My only word of caution is if anyone offers to write about you or put you in their playlist for a sum of money, don't do it. Do not do it.
Probably they're bots, for example, in the Spotify game.
It's very likely to be bots or just something shady going on in general. And at the end of the day, the idea that you're paying someone to share your music just really takes the merit out of it. If I was an artist and I knew that so-and-so only wrote about me because I paid them $50, I wouldn't feel confident that it was my music that accomplished that. So I would kind of know deep down inside that I was lying to myself. And it's definitely a quick and easy way to feel like you're having success. But I highly doubt that any of those guys out there paying for playlist placement and whatnot are actually having proper success.
Das war die 16. Episode von How to Make It, dem Podcast für Musiker, die wirklich etwas erreichen wollen. Ich hoffe wirklich sehr, dass dir die Folge gefallen hat und du einiges für dich mitnehmen konntest. Wenn das so ist, dann lass gerne eine Bewertung da und teile die Folge auch gerne mit anderen Musikern, die davon profitieren könnten. Vielen Dank für deinen Support und fürs Zuhören. Bis zum nächsten Mal.